Hello and welcome to the YakAngler workshop. I'm your host, Greg the Hammerhead Crisp, and today we'll be installing a pair of flush mount rod holders into my wife's kayak. To accomplish this task today, we'll need a pair of flush mount rod holders, some hardware to attach the rod holders to the kayak, and some RTV or marine grade silicone. Additional tools that we'll need to accomplish today's task are a drill, a rivet gun, a rotozip tool, and of course your safety glasses. The first step in this project is to determine the location that you're going to mount the rod holders in. Some boats give you lots of options to mount the rod holders. They have lots of flat areas that you can mount them in. Other boats give you very few. On my wife's kayak here, we chose to mount the rod holders in the location where they actually install the factory rod holders. Once you have your location picked out for mounting your rod holders, the next choice that you have is deciding the angle that you're going to mount the rod holders at. Your options here include mounting the rod holder facing straight back. You would use this position mainly for storing rods, or you would start angling the rod holders out to the side of the kayak. The reason that you would angle them outside is if you plan on using these flush mount rod holders for trolling. And then you also have to decide at what angle you want them located at for trolling. Once you have the location and the angle decided upon, the next step is to mark on the kayak the location. Best tool I've found for this is of course Sharpie pen. Works great for mounting the kayak. What you want to do is you want to hold the gasket in the position that you want and mark out the hole that you're going to cut for the rod holder. The next step in mounting the rod holders, once you have the location marked, is to cut a hole in the kayak for the main body of the rod holder. The best tool I found to do this is a rotozip tool. I have one mounted on my Dremel tool right here. Other options include using a hole saw. If you use a hole saw, you'll get a nice round hole in the kayak. The problem is for these angled flush mount rod holders, the hole's slightly ovaled. So if I was to use a hole saw, what I would do is I would cut the correct size hole for the smallest dimension, and then I would slowly open up the hole and make it ovaled with a pocket knife or a utility knife. Now when you're using a rotozip tool, you want to make sure you're wearing your safety glasses and not wearing any loose clothing or jewelry. Now once you're done cutting out the hole, you want to save that piece of plastic. If you ever have a crack in your kayak or drill a hole accidentally, it's going to come in very handy. So make sure all the cut off pieces from the kayak you save. Once you get the hole cut, you want to do a test fit of your rod holder. Make sure the location is exactly where you want it. You're then going to position the rod holder and hold it steady, and you want to mark out the first hole that you're going to drill for the rod holder to mount it in its location. Now, to drill a hole for the rod holder, I like to use a wood bit with a pilot tip on it. This pilot tip works very well in keeping the drill bit from walking around on the kayak and gives you a very straight hole. Now, once you've drilled the hole, put the rod holder back into place, and I'm just going to slip one rivet in that hole. Then I'm going to go to the hole on the opposite corner and mark the second hole. Then I pop a rivet into that one. Now, with rivets just set in the two opposite corners, that rod holder can't move. Now I go ahead and mark the last two holes. Take the rod holder out. And drill those. Do another quick test fit. Make sure it's in the position I want. And now it's time to fasten it. Now let's talk some fastening hardware. For this installation, we're going to be using a rivet. Other options would include using a bolt and nut. For this installation, we chose rivets for a couple reasons. The biggest being the fact that we cannot access that location from any of the existing hatches, and we don't feel the need to install a hatch just to install these rod holders. The other reason for the rivet is these rod holders are going to be used primarily for storing the rods only. They're not going to see a lot of stress. If you were using the rod holders for trolling out in the ocean for larger fish, I would definitely recommend using a nut and bolt. Anytime I use a bolt, I always back up the nut on the inside with a large fender type washer, and then I always use a nylock nut as well. As far as rivets go, you always want to use the tri-star type rivet, and I'll show you why right now. When you use a normal rivet, you put in the rivet gun and squeeze down, and it pulls the rivet and fastens it to the kayak. And you can see that's not a very large area that rivet is going to pull out against. One thing that you can do to help increase the grip of the rivet is, of course, to use a washer to back it up. But let's face it, if we're using rivets, chances are we can't access the back of the kayak. So in that case, you want to use a tri-star type rivet. You can find these at a lot of kayak rigging places, and you can see when that rivet gets pulled in, you can see how much more area that has to pull against the back of your kayak. Gives you a much more secure fit, and you'll be a lot happier with the results. Okay, so now for the installation of the rod holder, we're going to use some silicone glue or silicone adhesive. You want to make sure you're using 100% silicone. An excellent brand for it is the Marine Goop type, but definitely not the latex type. You want to be using 100% silicone. I'm going to take the silicone. I always make sure I circle every hole I put in the kayak with it. So all your mounting holes, and then of course the big hole that you cut in for the main body of the rod holder. After you've gotten that on, you want to place your gasket down. Now I also put a thin layer of silicone between the gasket on the rod holder as well. Same thing, you want silicone around all the edges that you just opened up to keep your kayak as sealed as possible. And you place the rod holder in there. Once again, you place all your rivets in before you start tightening them down. And then get out your rivet gun and go ahead and pull them tight. Now I like to pull them a little bit tight, all four of them first, before I break any of them off. Make sure I have them all flush. I'm getting silicone squeezing out around the edge. And there you go. You have a flush mount rod holder installed on your kayak, and you're ready to go fishing. Thanks for joining us on the YakAngler workshop. We hope to see you out on the water. Wear your PFD. Tight lines, y'all.